All right, so good morning and welcome to Norcal PTAC webinar, How to Do Business with the Government. This is part of a series that we do. I believe it's the second Thursday of every month. My name is James Forrest. I am a procurement specialist with Norcal PTAC. Our main presenter today is going to be Thomas Burns, a fellow procurement specialist, also with Norcal PTAC. Thanks so much for joining, Thomas, and putting this together. I want to talk a little bit about PTACs before we hand things over to the main presentation. I won't take up too much of your time, but PTACs really are a really cool resource. And so if you're not aware of us yet, there's about 96 PTACs across the country. We are all nonprofit centers funded by federal and state dollars. And what we do is we help businesses compete and succeed in the government marketplace. So what we do with a number of different services I'll talk about in the next slide. But in FY21, and this information will be updated pretty soon for last year, but PTAC served over 56,000 clients across the country and helped them win more than 24 billion in government contracts and subcontracts. And you can see here, there's actually about 7 PTACs plus the American Indian PTAC, which covers a lot of states in the West, just in California alone here. So we're a big state. We have a healthy percentage of the PTACs in the country. And just Norcal PTAC alone, if you can see, this is our map here. We cover the 9 counties of the Bay Area in green here, and then up the coast, Mendocino, Humboldt, Del Norte, and then those inland counties, Siskiyou, Trinity, Shasta as well. We are, like the other PTACs, we offer the same basic core services. That is one-on-one counseling, so procurement specialists, such as myself and Thomas Burns and a team of others, to meet with you remotely to go over really just about any topic related to government contracting. So whether we're talking about, well, I can actually go just hop to the next slide here. SAM registrations, all kinds of certifications. If you've heard of FBA certifications, WOSB, things like that. Also California state certifications, local business certifications with city and county government. We help with pretty much all of it. We can help you create capability statements, market research. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Really, if it's related to government contracting, we can help with it. The notable things we don't help with are funding, startup assistance, grant, things of that nature. You're going to want to talk to the Small Business Development Center, SBDC. If you don't know who they are, then you can go ahead and just Google your county and SBDC, and or ask us for referrals for partners of ours. So that's kind of the bread and butter of what we do is one-on-one counseling. We also have a custom bid matching tool that we can set up for you. This is pretty neat. Basically, you just give us some keywords in a geographic area, and we'll set up a profile that will search through the internet, all these different databases, and spit out matches that ideally should match what you sell and give you RFQs, RFIs, opportunities, government contracting opportunities that match what you sell in your inbox every morning. And the third thing, because you are here today, is that we offer resources and trainings. We're always putting on webinars. We're starting to get back to in-person events, so we're really excited about that as well. And these are always free to join for anyone, anywhere. You don't need a business. You don't need to be in our service area, although those are certainly perks. Just a few stats here. In 2021, our clients won more than 50 million, that's $500 million with a B, in government contracts. So that is a very healthy share of that national awards metric for our small business clients. So we're really excited about that figure, excited about putting these dollars, basically your tax dollars, going back into your pocket. So the long and the short of it is please sign up on our website. If you're in our service area, all you need is to have a primary location in our service area and to have an established business and be looking for government contracting assistance. If you're looking for another PTAC that's not ours, there's a second link here. When you get the slides, you can click on that. That'll give you a directory of all the PTACs, or just Google your county and the word PTAC, maybe your state. It usually comes up with it. Okay, I'm going to hand things over to Thomas now. Thomas has been with us for many years. Thomas is a procurement specialist, gives a really great introduction presentation. So I am looking forward to seeing what you have today, Thomas. Thank you so much, and take it away.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to 2023. All right. So, Thomas Burns, procurement specialist I've been with Norcal PTAC going on almost 3 years now. And I've been an entrepreneur since almost 2001. And I really enjoy the small business space. I want to say I'm one of the fans or advocates of the small business community, and looking forward to answering your questions and providing this information. Hold on. Let me see. It's not moving forward. Oh, here we go. Give me a second.
Yeah, if you just click twice, it should.
Right.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
Okay. So before we begin, just want to give a quick disclosure. All the information within this webinar is accurate and up to date to the best of our information. But of course, things can change every day. And so if things have changed and there might be something incorrect, please forgive us. Okay, our agenda. So we've already talked about what is Norcal PTAC. We're going to also focus on government contracting, how to determine if selling is right for you. I think that's the first place we really want to start. Make sure you're not wasting your time and that your product or service is an ideal application for the government. How to get started, marketing to the government, which is a soft spot for me because I've always been in the sales and marketing side of things. Where to find business success, bid opportunities, steps for success. Okay, so what is government contracting? So this is a slide that really highlights in an overall way the things that government does buy versus what they don't buy. And as you can see on the right side, they're not into anything that's on a retail side, right? They're supposed to be utilizing our tax dollars to the most efficient way. And so, of course, luxury items and entertainment, bars and restaurants just don't fit in that category. Whereas on the other side, they're supposed to be utilizing our tax dollars for the benefit of our communities. So that's our roads, our bridges, all kind of professional services, of course, the medical, transportation. And so this is in general, the huge areas of what they do support versus what the government doesn't purchase. This next slide, though, really kind of helps break it down. So this is just one state institution here in California with a pretty good list of everything they purchase. And do you see yourself or do you see your business within this list? If you do, then you're ideal for government contracting opportunities, whether it's on the federal level, states, cities, counties, transportation districts, even school districts, and of course, universities. So I'm going to move forward, but yeah, this is really just a helpful slide to kind of get you to see just the volume and the variety of products and services that the government does purchase. This is a structure, and the reason for this slide is to really highlight the way a contract, if it's a large contract, how that will flow for everybody to be a part of it. So the agency is going to hire one contractor for a large project, let's say building a bridge. And then that prime contractor, as part of that contract, they have to award a certain percentage of that contract to subcontractors, to typically small businesses. And that percentage varies based on the agency and what they're trying to do. It could be as low as 10% up to 40% I've seen. So that's the overall structure for a large project. And so, recipe for success. Are you really ready for government contracting? And when I have a new client with Norcal PTAC, this is always where we want to start off. We want to focus on making sure your business is first. Are you ready to even go after government contracting? Are you an established business? Having a business plan that includes government contracting, in my opinion, is really important. It means taking the time to do some research before saying, okay, I want to do business with this agency or this entire branch of the government, i.e. I get a lot of clients that want to do business with the federal government, and they don't spell out exactly who in the federal government should you do business with, and why are you choosing this agency, the EPA, over this other agency, DOD, or Department of Health and Human Services, right? There's no real concrete research before you make a decision. And I encourage my clients to always do that research before they choose which agency they want to focus on. Financial stability, because the government pays in arrears, meaning you do the work, then you invoice, then you get paid. And it can be as short as 10, 15 days to as long as 90 days. And being able to support your company and all of its bills and everything while you're waiting to get paid is very important. The next one is a key one, which is past performance. And having a history of sales with the government or on the private side is important for contracting officers and those people who have to make the decisions on what company they're going to hire to provide them with the products and services they need. It's not a complete deal breaker if you don't, but I always tell everybody, there's always competition. So if there are 3 companies going after the same contract for products or services, and the other 2 have past performance and you don't, it's going to be very difficult to ultimately win that bid when your competition already has some kind of past performance. So just bear that in mind. Past performance is really important for the government. Again, marketing research, doing your due diligence in the beginning before you just jump into government contracting is important. And having a website that highlights your e-commerce capabilities if you're really into the product space. Any questions, James, right now? I don't think there's any, right? Okay. So
some activity in the chat, but no questions.
Okay, great.
Okay. So Connie is asking about perishable foods for school meal, military, etc. Is that
yeah? I have. I've actually in the last couple of months, I've had a few clients that sell either a new type of beverage or different types of food items, whether it's a canned type of food or fresh vegetables and fruits. There are several different outlets to sell food and beverage to different government, everything from universities to the federal government.
All right, nothing more for now. Just remember, folks, you can enter your questions into the Q&A.
Okay, so how to get started working and looking at the government as an opportunity for contracting and really growing your business. We do promote applying to PTAC. The next one is choosing your NAICS and your UNSPSC codes. If you've never seen or heard of these, so the government needs a way to identify industries, products, and services. And so a series of codes was created years ago to help the government identify a product or service or an industry. A quick example would be a contracting officer who's looking to purchase, and since we brought up food, they're looking to purchase cases of peanut butter for their university or for a hospital, as an example. They're going to identify that purchase with a specific NAICS code. And the UNSPSC code is similar. It just is a longer number. There are more classifications. It's a more of a greater breakdown utilizing the UNSPSC code. However, in my experience, I've only really seen California use that code. I don't see it used on the federal side, and I don't really see it being used with cities and counties, but it's definitely the code that the state of California uses versus the next code. So it's important to being here in California to understand both of those codes. Registering on Cal eProcure, that is the gateway into signing up as a vendor for the state of California. So if you want to do business with the 233 different agencies within the state of California, Cal eProcure is your first step. Now, on the federal side, if you want to do business with the federal government, your first step is sam.gov. So as of 2022, they created the UEI system instead of DUNS. And so anybody who wants to do business on the federal side has to first get their UEI number and a cage code by registering with SAM. Also, the dynamic small business search is a part of the federal government also. So basically, when a contracting officer on the federal side is looking for a small business to provide them with a product or service, and let's say they don't have enough in their own network or database, they can turn to this SBA database, the Dynamic Small Business, and all of the companies that are in SAM have some type of profile, but you are allowed to go in and update that profile. And you can include keywords, your past performances, and your capability statements or narratives. Also, creating a capability statement is really key because the government treats that as your business card. And later on in this webinar, I'll go into more detail. So I'll keep going, but I'll cover the capability statement and its importance further on. And then, of course, making sure your website is government friendly. This is important because if you really want to focus on government as a marketing opportunity, then creating your website so that at least one landing page, just tells them that, yes, you're definitely interested in doing business with the government by having your capability statement, having your next code or any certifications listed is really a great idea. And this is one that can take another hour. So we're going to go over this very quickly, but we have a lot of information on our website in terms of our past webinars. And of course, another reason to connect with Norcal PTAC for services. And that's getting these various certifications. So in the state of California, there's the three, right? There's the small business, and then the small business for public works, i.e. construction, and then the one for disabled veterans, so DVBE. Now, on the federal side, there are these that you see listed. The first one, though, I always tell people when you sign up in SAM and you answer the questions correctly based on your company size, your NAICS codes, and your minority classifications, that if you do qualify, you are what's called a self-certified small business, meaning you don't have to go through a lengthy application process. The woman-owned small business, veteran-owned, the HUB zone, the 8A, and the DBE all require an application process, whereas the SB or SDB do not. And so, but these are all the different certifications, and the overreaching reason and value of having a certification for a small business is just to give you a little bit more of a competitive edge against larger firms. It allows you to have an opportunity to maybe partner with larger firms who are looking to connect with certified small businesses. It also gives you an opportunity when certain government agencies award what's called a set-aside contract, right? The government will say, you know what, this product or service that we need to buy, we're going to set this aside just for women-owned small business. And so you have to be a certified women-owned small business to even bid on that. You're still going to have competition because there's thousands of women-owned small businesses, but the competition has been narrowed to just that classification. So those are the really key benefits of being certified. Any questions on certifications? Even though, like I said, it's a big topic, but hopefully I gave a good overview of just the reason for having and being certified.
None right now.
Okay. Local contracting. This is where I really believe starting off where you should focus your the bulk of your energy, because it's a huge market. It's just as big as the federal government in many ways, right? Because when you think about local contracting, you're thinking about all of the contracting opportunities. So as I mentioned before, school districts. How many school districts are in your city or in your county or in neighboring counties, right? Let's say you are, like I live here in San Francisco. And if I wanted to do business with government agencies within a 50-mile radius of my location here in San Francisco, there's San Francisco as a county, you have San Mateo County, you have Santa Clara County, Alameda County, Marin County. So that's 5 counties just within a 50-mile radius. And that's just the counties. What about all the cities within each of these counties? And then what about the universities and the transportation agencies? Here in the Bay Area, we have BART, we have the different light rail systems, and every city or every county also has their own bus system. You also have the ports and the different waterways. All of that is ideal for what we call local contracting opportunities. And it can be an easier path to successful contracting when you're just starting off. The other certification that's listed here, the local business enterprise, that's when a city or county says, you know what, for those businesses that are located in the city where that county is, we will offer a certification just for the local businesses. And they get those same perks, i.e. sometimes they have a set aside, or they provide where on a big contract, those primes have to award subcontracting opportunities to the local businesses. And these are just as a reminder, you're going to receive these slides when we finish, and all of these links will take you to everything that we're talking about. And so here we are, have the capability statement. So on the right side, these are the main topics that are going to be part of your capability statement. And basically, it's a business card or resume for your company. And basically, the government created this, I don't know exactly when, but it's an ideal document that helps contracting officers and managers within government to quickly analyze and understand what you do, what your services are, where you're located, what are your codes, so they can quickly see everything they need to see to determine if this is right for them. Because you have to understand, contracting officers get flooded with information from businesses, large and small, wanting to do business with them. And there's a lot of information that gets sent their way. And so they need a way to quickly see, is this company right for me? That's the capability statement. Here is an example that we provide all of our clients. So if you want an example of what a really ideal capability statement looks like, this is it. That link will download it to you. It's a Word document, completely customizable. But as you can see, it's one page front and back. Oh, by the way, when you do send off a capability statement, you want to make sure you've turned it into a PDF file and don't leave it as a Word document. So I encourage you, even if you don't become a client, I encourage you to download this free template. and make sure you start working on your own capability statement. If you need assistance, we have webinars, or you can reach out for free services. And the other one that's really important is making sure your website is contracting ready, i.e. it's you're marketing to the government, letting them know you definitely want to do business with them by having that same information, but in a more attractive format, right? With a website, you can have more pictures, you can have videos. There's so many things you can do with one section that you want to promote to the government. Any questions about the capability statement or just, having a contracting ready website?
I've got some folks asking about the template. Yeah, the template is on the link. You can find it on our website, actually, under, if you click on norcalptac.org. I put a link there for the webinars, where people are also asking about the slide be posted. And if you click on resources, you're going to find a tab on capability statement where you can find our own template.
Okay, thank you. All right, marketing to the government. A lot of times, here's where businesses of all sizes, actually, but they drop the ball when it comes to marketing. And what happens is a lot of the clients and a lot of the small businesses, they rely too much on looking for RFP opportunities, requests for proposals, requests for qualifications, RFQs, where the government submits a solicitation, a notice saying, hey, we need to purchase this product or this service, and then they want to respond and see if they're successful. And what I've come to understand from the research and talking to the government and everything is that RFPs and RFQs are anywhere from 20 to 40% of how they purchase. The bulk is done directly. And what that means is instead of the government submitting an RFP process or an RFQ, they reach out to businesses that they already are either aware of or they're in their database, like they have each city or each county, even the federal government, all of these agencies have their own vendor portal where you as a small business can register your company directly with that agency. And they'll utilize that network, and they can only, they can either reach out directly and just because depending on the size of the need, if it's $5,000, $10,000, they can just go out and purchase. If it's, let's say, 25,000 to anywhere from 100 to 200,000, depending on the agency, they just need a few bids, right? They can invite 3, 4, 5 companies, take the best bid, and make a decision. The point being, a lot of the decision making is done based off of some type of relationship that the agency already has or knows about with the small business community. So it's really important to do your best to network and meet the contracting officers, understand what they need in 6 months, in 12 months. And so this list here really does a good job of just highlighting the importance of participating in trainings that are available from different agencies, attending the expos and the matchmaking events and the conferences, utilizing LinkedIn. One of the things I've learned by working with Norcal PTAC and from my previous work when I had my own company is the value that the government puts on LinkedIn. I want to say 90% of the government, whether it's a school district or a military base, they have some type of LinkedIn profile, and the employees of that agency are also listed, on that website, on LinkedIn, and they're connected to that agency. And so it's another way to understand who's working there, what are their titles, and how you can network. So having your own LinkedIn presence is important. Attending the government agencies that you want to do business with, making sure you sign up as a vendor, making sure you look for opportunities to network with them. Another key one that's listed here is the small business representatives. Now, they have different names. In the state of California, they're called small business advocates. On the federal side, I've seen small business representatives, small business professionals, but those titles, they all function in the same way. They are the middleman that go between the contracting officers and the small business community. The small business representatives' jobs is to help the contracting officers do business with more small businesses. And on the small business side, that small business representative's job is to connect with and provide information to the small business community on how to successfully win contracts with their agency. So having that relationship is really important, regardless of who you want to do business with, whether it's the state, cities, counties, or on the federal side. The final one, I mentioned it before, the Dynamic Small Business Search. Again, that's a federal database. It's managed by the Small Business Administration, and it's utilized by federal contracting officers looking for small businesses. And so it's important to update that with the most valuable information and try to keep it updated maybe once a year, depending on your business. This is another important one, right? I talked about what an RFP is, what an RFQ is, but here's where you can find these opportunities. Again, Norcal PTAC does really a good job of locally highlighting the cities and counties within our territory and giving you a link that goes directly to their procurement page. You can also go to Cali Procure, and when you go to their events page, that lists the most recent solicitations coming from each different agency in the state of California. And on the federal side, again, sam.gov, you click on contracting opportunities, and you have to do a search utilizing either keywords or NAICS codes or even location or agency, but there's multiple ways to filter to find contracting opportunities on the federal side using sam.gov. Now, acquisition.gov is a really unique website. It's a federal website. It's only designed for federal agencies. But what it does is on this website, you can look up what's upcoming procurement opportunities forecast. So when an agency such as the DoD, they have to post the products and services that each of their sub-agencies will be needing in the next year. So right now we're in January, so you can download an Excel spreadsheet that's going to tell you what products and services they anticipate purchasing for the next 12 to 24 months. And many of those downloads will include information on either contracting officers or the small business specialists. These lists also can tell you the dollar amount estimates of what they intend to purchase, right? It might say in the third quarter of 2023, this agency will need $250,000 worth of this product. Could be laptops, or this service, it might be marketing services, right? And they'll spell it out based on your NAICS code. Acquisition.gov also is a way to go directly to each agency's small business page. So each of these federal agencies have devoted a certain section of their website to small business. So you have the small business specialists, you have their advocates, and any other resources that they want to offer the small business community so that you can have a better way of navigating and understanding how to do business with them. Acquisition.gov is a great tool that gets you right to those websites. And then again, Norcal PTAC We have what's called a bid match service. It's a free service that we offer to our clients. And basically utilizing keywords, we can direct those new RFPs and RFQs that come out as a service, and it goes directly to your inbox. Any questions that I could focus on before I go to the next slide?
We have a question from a little ways back. Maybe we could save this for the end, but they're looking for some more information about how to respond to RFQs and find expos.
Sure. So in summary, these are what we consider our 10 steps for success when you're beginning the process of looking at contracting, government contracting as a way to increase sales and become a more profitable company. First, of course, determining if you're ready for government contracting, applying for our services. And within that, there's a checklist that really kind of gives you a good overview that you should really check out and make sure you're ready. Getting certified, making sure you understand the certification process, understanding which certifications are ideal for you. Also creating your capability statement, updating your website, and then the long process. And the reason I say long, because this isn't something you just do for 1 or 2 months. It's a continuous part of this process, building the relationships, marketing your business, and networking to those government entities that are ideal for your business in terms of the opportunities that you're looking for with your product or service. Locating the bid opportunities, submitting that first bid, potentially failing, trying again. You know, one of the questions we get asked almost every time is, I'm new to this. How long is it going to be before I win my first contract? And, you know, it's such a arbitrary question that we can't give you a straight answer, only because it just depends. We've had clients and I've seen businesses that have been successful within 60 days, right? They go into this, they create their capability statement, they update their website, they look for an opportunity, they find one, they submit an RFP, and lo and behold, they are the winner. They're the lowest bid and they win. Others, that process, they do the same thing. They're networking, and it might take 9, 10, 12 months. There is no set guarantee in government contracting whatsoever, but there are great opportunities for all businesses. And a lot of it depends on how you present yourself, how you present your company, what are your past performances, if you have any, and the competition that's in your industry. Depending on your product or service, how much competition is there? That's really a key to seeing that quick success, or how long will it take you? And finally, I just want to cover, we don't work alone. So this is our team here at Norcal PTAC. And I think the next slide is just talking about upcoming events, and then we'll go into questions. So James, did you want to go over the upcoming events?
Yeah, I'll just drop in really quickly. We're going to get to the questions, but just want to note that we have a very busy season right now, a little lull in December, but that is far in the past now. I'm going to be presenting on how to become a wildland firefighting vendor. So we're going to have guests from the Forest Service as well as CAL FIRE talking about what to do if you have some heavy equipment or faller modules, something like that. You want to get on in the fire season. It doesn't happen in August when the fires are raging. It happens now in the winter, well before season. So we're talking a lot about that. This is coming up a week from today, exactly January 19th. And then we've got 2 webinars in January. We've got how to win contracts by making a capture strategy. And that's all about how to understand government contracting spending cycles and how to make your own strategy to approach them in order to capture those dollars that are going out. Thomas talked a little bit about forecasting and things like that. and then getting started with local contracting. So one of our procurement specialists is going to be going over how to get into local contracting, which is another thing that Thomas talked on. So going to this presentation is a great intro to segueing into some of these other topics. So please join those. Those are in January. We've got registration up for them. We have an 8A certification overview. 8A is an SBA certification program for minority-owned businesses. It's not just a certification, it's a whole program. It's a 9-year program. So if you're interested in that, that is February 2nd. Again, all of these are at 10 to 11 a.m. So hope to see you at these. These are all free to join for everyone from anywhere. Okay, let's go to some questions here. First question we have is from Bridget McIntyre asking, how do you respond to RFQs?
Okay, so request for qualification. This is when an agency is not ready to purchase, but they want a list of qualified vendors or suppliers. So they put out an RFQ, and your response is to fill out the RFQ exactly as it states within. So put it this way: every single RFQ and RFP are going to have very specific directions on what to do. It might say, okay, so this can be no longer than 20 pages. It'll give you specific sections that you have to complete. It'll tell you exactly what format in terms of a table of contents. So it tells you within the RFQ exactly what information they want. They want to know your technical experience, or if it's just a product. Let's say they're doing an RFQ for products. Of course, it's about cost and your ability to provide the product within a certain timeline. And so they will have a list of questions, and it's just answering the questions to the best of your ability and submitting it within the due date that is set within the RFQ, and making sure that you follow their rules of procedure when you upload that. Sometimes they'll say it has to be uploaded via email. Sometimes they'll say it has to be mailed, and they'll tell you exactly how to mail it and everything you have to do. So the rules are directly within the RFQ or RFP.
Great. And Bridget's saying, thank you so much. This is really helpful. So good answer, Thomas. Bridget had another question here. And just a reminder, anyone else can ask questions here. Just pop it in the Q&A and we'll get to it if we have time. It looks like we have plenty of time. Bridget's asking, how do you learn about expos in order to attend them?
Expos. So that's there's many different ways. I'll give you a few off the top of my head. First is the website of that agency that you want to do business with. So remember, I was saying the agency will have a page devoted to their posting of the RFQs and RFPs. Well, on that same page, they may also show you an events calendar. And on that events calendar, we'll have a listing of when they're going to have either some kind of training or some kind of expo or conference or seminar. The other way to look for opportunities is, of course, with an agency such as Norcal PTAC or the multiple different organizations that are designed to provide information to the small business community about business events taking place. As an example, the state of California, they have an events page, and there's always events coming from the state of California. Because each agency might do a training for just what their needs. For example, CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE may say, okay, in March, we're going to have some type of expo or some kind of training to help understand how to do business with CAL FIRE. Another example would be BART, Bay Area Rapid Transportation. They have networking events. They have different events to help the small business community understand how to do business with them. And those are posted directly on their websites, or they will reach out to associations like Norcal PTAC small business development centers, and other agencies who are charged with delivering this information to the community. So as you network with different agencies, as you go on LinkedIn and create your profile, you'll be exposed to more information on a monthly or even daily basis sometimes about these upcoming events.
Great. And any quick tips on what to do when you attend an expo?
So when you attend an expo as an attendee and you're looking to network with either primes, you know, the larger firms, or with the different agencies, of course, having your business cards, having your capability statement already created and, you know, on hand with you are key. But go there to learn, right? Go there with an understanding of the kind of questions you want to ask about what are their needs in the next 6 to 12 months? That's always a great way to start. What are their needs, and do they purchase my product or service, right? So get into those kind of conversations. You could also ask questions about their procedures. Every agency might do things a little bit different. A university who needs to purchase IT might do things a little bit different than the city of San Jose, as an example, right? So understanding their purchasing procedures and letting them direct you on where to go to learn more information or to gain more insight. Just go there with the idea of you want to learn as much as possible.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah, because it's not really going to be about selling your product or service at those events, right? Those events are more of networking, just to learn and then take that information and then do your follow-up.
You don't think being prepared with a 30 or 60-second elevator speech would be helpful for expos?
Sure. But again, your ability to have your business cards, your capability statement are really important. And then, yeah, that 30-second speech, you know, when it gets much easier and that flow really becomes more natural as you do it over and over again.
Right, yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. That's a really, really good answer. Thanks, Thomas. Navdeep is asking, can you add NAICS codes to your SAM profile after your registration comes in? That's an easy one.
Oh, so as part of your SAM registration, you have to add your NAICS codes. So you have to include NAICS codes. Now, you can always update your SAM and add or change your NAICS codes at any time you want. But yes, you have to put those in when you're creating your SAM profile.
Mm-hmm. All right. But so the answer is yes, you can certainly edit them afterwards, but you do require an initial offering of NAICS codes. All right, Dave is asking, is there an accessible list of prime or subcontractors who are already doing business with the government? So more specifically, freight line haul businesses are currently contractors for traffic.
Yeah, there's a couple different ways to look at this. On the federal side, there's GSA, General Services Administration. GSA has a great website that highlights all of the businesses that have what's called a GSA schedule. Now, the bulk of that are a collection of mid to small businesses, but you can also search based on large firms, right? And so the listing of what we would call primes, those larger companies, they are all in GSA. Another way to find primes is to do searching on sam.gov. You can actually find large firms on sam.gov. And then one more is usaspending.gov. I've been utilizing usaspending.gov a whole lot in the last 6 to 9 months. And it's really a powerful free website that the government supports. That website is designed to track all federal spending. So as a quick example, you can go to usaspending.gov, put in a keyword, let's say your IT, right? You sell laptops and cables and everything like that. So you can put a keyword in, you can click 20, 23, 22, 21, and just put 1 or 2 NAICS codes in there, hit submit search, and it will give you a list of all of the awards, and it'll put it in dollar amount at the top. So the biggest dollar amount award will be at the top of that list, and it'll go down from there. So let's say the list is 500 long. The biggest one was $100 million. You can look and see who won that award. So it'll give you the award ID and then the recipients, i.e. the companies that won that contract. And by and large, those are your primes, right? Especially those $100 million, $80 million, $50 million, $20 million awards are all going to be primes. So that's another easy way to find primes in your NAICS code or category.
Perfect. Thanks, Thomas. There's also something called the SBA subnet, which is a federal website designed to bridge the gap between large primes and small businesses looking to do subs. So that's the contracting work. That's something you could take a look as well. All right, thank you so much, Thomas. I'm learning from you as well. Carrie has a question here. Someone had a question earlier about innovative product. I asked for a clarification. James, I didn't get a response there, but Carrie has a nice detailed question here. Carrie says, I'm in a similar boat as the gentleman before James, who I've been told that the DoD needs my product, but it only exists in a different form. Would this prohibit my ability to get contracting because the product doesn't needed doesn't have a sales history? So this is a question about innovative products that aren't ready.
Okay.
So I think it's about unsolicited proposals and how to market it.
Yeah, we're talking about sending an unsolicited proposal, right? That's what she was. Okay.
That's my understanding.
So every agency, as far as I have seen, every single agency does allow for the submission of what they call an unsolicited proposal. The government doesn't know what they don't know. So if you have a product or service that you feel would be ideal for that agency, and they don't know this product exists, it's a new invention or something like that, you can submit an unsolicited proposal, and the rules for how to do that are on that same area where it talks about how to do business with a small business. Every single, well, I won't say every single, but almost every agency will devote some section of their website to how to do business with us, right? How to do business with us, where how to sign up as a vendor, how to look at our RFP and RFQ notices. And within that area, there should be especially on the federal side, if you're talking about DoD and stuff like that, they will give you a link that talks about how to submit an unsolicited proposal.
Great.
Yeah, because I can't just say you do it this way, because one way might not be the way the DoD has it. And the DoD might do it differently than, let's say, NASA. NASA might do it differently than Department of Health and Human Services. Yeah.
There's so much research that's required when you're getting into the government market of understanding how to approach these different animals.
Yeah, it's never one size fits all. There's always going to be some different keys or different ways of doing it for each agency.
Right. All right. That's all the questions we have right now. Oh, let's see. We do have one here. Someone's asking, they're saying, what if we found an SBIR from Homeland Security that matches our product?
You mean an SBIR? Is that what you said?
SBIR, yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, those are highly competitive though, but we can help you submit your SBIR proposal. It's a two-step process. The first step is fairly simple in that they limit you, right? You only can do, I believe it's 500 words per section. So they want to know about your product, about your company, and how is this going to help the government. And does it have commercial applications? And they limit you, right? You have to give a very concise narrative. You submit that. If that is approved, then you have to submit a much more detailed proposal. And if that's approved, then you're essentially awarded the contract and you're funded, I believe it's 700, no, I forgot the dollar amount I don't want to say it when I don't know exactly what the dollar amount is. But yeah, the SBR will give you a set dollar amount. And as long as you meet the goals and do the R&D that you're trying to do, then there's another award that you can apply for once you complete that one. And of course, all this information is on that website, right? For the DoD, they have a specific SBIR category, just like the Department of Energy, Department of State, Health and Human Services. They all have their own SBIR area where you can get this information.
And I think most clients of ours who are requesting SBIR assistance right now, we're referring them over to the Tech Futures group if you're in our service area.
Okay.
Located out of the Bay Area, and this is what they do, is they work on SBIR proposals a ton. So if you're accepted with them, that's a great resource. James, looks like you have some detailed questions about this. If you're in our service area, go ahead and apply if you're not already a client. Sounds like you would make a good candidate for sitting down and asking some in-depth questions. All right, thank you so much. That is the end of the time we have for today. I'd like to have a huge thanks for Thomas for putting on an excellent presentation, and thank you all of you for joining. I hope to see you at future events, and keep an eye out for an email hopefully later today that has the information with the slides as well as video recording. As you're exiting the webinar today, you should be redirected towards a page with a link on it. That just has a link to our satisfaction survey. Just let us know how you felt about today's webinar. We always want to be improving our services, and we love to get the feedback. So if you found it helpful, just let us know, and we'll see you at a future webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. You have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.